Thank you for being here. I know it's Dead Week. You've got a bunch of concerts going on. You have to be in every ensemble. So thank you so much for being here, for taking time out of your stressful schedule. My name is Sam Wheeler. I am originally from Grants Pass, Oregon. I did my undergrad here from 2013 to 2018. And then after that, I took a year off, auditioned some places for my master's, got into UT Austin, and that's where I did my master's there, and that's where I am now for my DMA. I'm in my third year under the tutelage of Thomas Burritt, Ivan Trevino, and Richard Huntley, among others. What I'm here today to do is to talk a little bit about what will eventually become my dissertation. My dissertation involves these things: fixed media and live processing, specifically with percussion, and it seeks to answer a few questions. Historically, why is it that percussionists seem to be the ones saddled with this the most? And I think there's the answers we have where it's like, oh, well, we do all the weird stuff. We're the ones that get handed a medium saucepan and get told, make a sound out of this. And so there's that option. There's also some other historical things I'm still doing research on, and if any of you have any insight, I would love to hear it. Because my other reason, but really my primary reason for doing these talks is to see where people are at, especially people still in college, still performing, with all of this, with the gear, with some of the software required, with the sounds, just with anything. So please, if you ever have any questions or comments about anything, just shout them out, and I would love to hear it, because that's really why I'm here, to gauge where people are at with this, because that will inform what I write about in the technical section of what will eventually be my dissertation in hopefully a little less than a year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through a couple pieces. I'm going to show you some new stuff that I'm working on with other composers, and yeah, so let's just get started. So before I get in, let's see. So here's some examples of some works you might be familiar with and the type of electronics they use. You have fixed media, which is sometimes referred to as tape pieces. Some really famous ones: One Steady, One Summary by Sothis. You guys know the marimba solo with all the pots and pans and junk and stuff. Stop Speaking, which I opened my senior recital with here, right here, with the screen down. It was very dramatic. Let's see, what else do I have? Torsion Wreck by Skidmore. T-High by Alexis Lamb. You all know about Alexis Lamb here? She's an amazing composer. She's got lots of cool speaking percussion pieces. That one in particular is a multi-piece for pipes, wood, glass, metal, and a singing bowl. It's meant to emulate Indian music, and the track is just kind of a drone, or her version of a drone that is electronic. So fixed media is oftentimes just one continuous track, a tape piece. Sometimes you need a click track to keep up with the track. Other times it's more open to interpretation. Sometimes you're meant to stay with the track, but there's no click involved. The track's just rhythmic enough. That's what happens in Stop Speaking. So that's what we most commonly run into. And obviously for that you just need speakers to get the sound out. But we'll talk a little bit more about some other options for that a little later on. Some more pieces we might be familiar with that involve live processing. I've called them the delay pieces here. Hinchinbrook loops, which was originally for guitar, and people started playing it on marimba. I think it involves just a quarter note delay, and you're kind of playing in canon with yourself the whole time. And it was so popular among percussionists that Nigel Westlake, who wrote the score for the movie Babe, you guys know this movie? It's about a talking pig that gets lost, I think. I can't remember. But film score guy from Australia, I think, or New Zealand maybe? I can't remember. He wrote Fabian Theory, which operates on similar principles, has delay, and that one also has some elements of loop pedals in it. And then another less known one is Mirrors of Emptiness by Grigor Smirnov. That's another one that is just a simple delay, but it's a bit quicker. It's very long too. It's 15 minutes long, and it's pretty notey. So those are just some examples of things in the canon that we might be familiar with. Now, since I haven't written my dissertation yet, I'm going to borrow my friend Jordan's. Dr. Jordan Walsh graduated from UT Austin 2 years ago now. He now works at ACC and Southwestern State University. And he wrote a dissertation kind of breaking things up, very similar to what I'm trying to do. And a big part of it was this interactivity spectrum, where he has 4 degrees that breaks down how the electronics interact. So the first one he calls uninteractive. So that means that you have no control over the sounds coming out. You simply hit play, a sound happens, and you play with it. There's no interaction between you or it, besides you just listening to it. So, and if you're reading along here, this makes it sound like he's being very critical of it, and this was kind of one of the more critical takes. But I think that when you're playing along with a track, especially if you played some of Andy's stuff like Stop Speaking and Umi, there's a lot you can do to interact with your digital duo partner, as I like to think of it as, and think about like the sounds you're making, blending with the electronic sounds, how the electronic sounds might run through the space, and just things like that to make it a little bit more than simply playing with a robot, as it feels like sometimes. But so degree 2 is altered sound. So that would be delay, like the 3 pieces we talked about from marimba down there, guitar pedals, so distortion, just very simple things that you hit a button and the sound of your instrument changes. There's 2 more degrees. Degree 3 is interactive music. It's very similar. It's similar to degree 2, but there's just a little bit more happening between you and the electronics. Maybe there's a compressor happening with a track that you're triggering every time you make a sound. And what a compressor does is you can sidechain, what's called sidechaining audio from another instrument in there, and what it'll do is it'll kick the compressor on, which what a compressor does is it does literally what it says in the name. It compresses the sound, and if you have it set high enough, the sound of that instrument will squish it to the point where it kind of goes away. So that's just one example. We don't see that quite as much commonly, but this is kind of the degree I'm trying to exist in, and you'll see an example of that in a second. And then degree 4 is algorithmic music. That's when you have one example is there's this piece, the name is escaping me, I'm sorry, where every time you play it, you go to a website and an algorithm generates a brand new score based on, I think, like the temperature outside or something like that. Or you would have a max patch, which is a DAW we'll talk about in a second, just making random sounds, all based on an algorithm. But the difference between that and, say, uninteractive music is that it's going to be different every time. There's a process governing it. However, I think it's really interesting because it kind of loops back on itself. You have on degree 1, uninteractive music, something you have no control over, and then you get all the way to algorithmic music, and once again, you're beholden to the robots, as it were. So, did you double check that it's recording, by the way? So, just something to keep in mind. This is Daniel Diadamo. He is the composer of the first work I'm going to show you today. He was born in Argentina and then moved to Paris to study with Felipe Minori. Do any of you know about Minori? Very important composer to the percussion idiom. Wrote a lot of really important stuff. He also teaches at Strasbourg in France, which has deep ties with Almadinda percussion, I believe, and also percussion at Strasbourg, which are both hugely important percussion groups in our field. So, and I didn't know any of this before I met him. He flew out all the way from Paris to come work with me for what I later figured out was going to be the U.S. premiere of this piece. It was very intense, but he's a very nice guy. And then, so we'll talk about the piece now. The piece from Rumbau is entitled a faraday cage. A faraday cage is just a metal enclosure that allows electromagnetic, there we go, radiation to move around it. So it essentially protects whatever's inside of it. And I think there are a couple reasons why he chose that. I think in these program notes, he might allude to that. But before I talk too much more about it, I'm just going to play it. So this is about the first 5 minutes or so of a faraday cage by Daniel Abelton. max MSP is what's called a DAW. Do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say a DAW? Right? Everyone's familiar. It stands for Digital Audio Workstation. It's basically putting that in a computer in some way, shape, or form. And usually DAWs will look a lot like that, but Max is a bit different. So this is what I'm looking at on my computer. And Max is unique because what this is just an interface screen, right? So actually underneath this, if you hit this button, I don't know if you can see that little yellow button from where you're at, it'll explode out into a million little digital cables connecting what's called different objects and things, which will control reverb, will control which fixed media is being triggered, all kinds of things. But this is what I'm looking at. And Max is great for composers because if they know how to use it, and it's very difficult to use, it's a very complicated program, they can create an interface as well as a patch. So can you see how that's really useful for them? Because if we're working in, say, Logic, and a composer wants to write a piece where someone is playing through Logic, whoever gets the piece, even if they send them a patch where everything is set up, they'll still have to have like a working knowledge of Logic to make it work. With this, if they're really good at it, they can basically send it to the person, whoever it is, and it'll work out of the box. And they don't know how to work the program to make it work. So I've highlighted just a few things. The trigger, there are 81 triggers total in it. They all fire using the MIDI foot pedal. I'm not sure if you could see that as I was playing. And what they do is they trigger sounds, fixed media files, that go and they layer in and out of each other. Some of them are built longer than they need to be, and then other patches will turn them off when they need. And what that does for me as a performer is it means I don't have to adhere to the tempo as strictly as, say, if it were just a track. Can you see how that works? Like if it were just a track, I would need clicks and I would have to and all of it's written in like 30-second notes and triplets and fivelets and stuff like that. And I'd have to stick to that really, really militantly. But with this, it makes it slightly harder, obviously, because I have to maneuver around and figure out where the MIDI pedal is while I'm doing all that stuff. But as a performer, I honestly prefer it because it gives me more agency over what's happening in the speakers. And yeah, I don't have to adhere to a click track. Because a lot of times, I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but a lot of times when you play a piece with clicks, it can feel like, all right, put the thing on, let's go on the roller coaster. It feels like the piece plays you sometimes, right? If you're not used to that kind of dynamic. So this is just one way around it. I think is really cool because the only processing besides the weird buzz that was happening, I don't know what that was, the only processing happening is reverb. We'll come back to that. Everything else you heard was fixed media. We remember what that is, right? It's not, it is a processed sound, but it's just like a recording of that sound. You see the difference, right? So, but it makes, the goal is to make it sound as if it were processed coming out. So that's all that is, and I have it open up here to see which event I'm on. The start button, very important, activates the mics. And so the other, yeah, so they're still on. So the other part of this is, the reason the reverb is there is to blend the acoustic sound with the digital sound, with the fixed media. And the reason it uses reverb to do this, it's actually helpful to know a little bit of audio history for that. So back when everything was still analog, there was no digital, reverb was actually a room, like an actual room in the recording studio that they would pump the acoustic sound into and then catch that sound coming out of this extra room. And so digital reverb in our modern day is just a digital version of that. So you can think of reverb like an imaginary room. And so what's happening is the fixed media, the dry signal, which means there's no processing on it. It's just as if you hear it in here, is being pumped into the same reverb, imaginary room, as this. And so that just gives it a bit of blend in the speakers before it gets into the room. Because if you've ever played a piece with fixed media, you know how difficult it is to get exactly the right balance and blend in the room, and even when you do, it still kind of sounds like there's a speaker and there's a player, right? So this is one way around it, and this is not, and I think this is really interesting, because it's not something he notates in the score about that much specifically. And when I asked him about it, and like the other composition people about it, they just kind of shook their heads. They're like, what do you mean? That's what you would always do. There's fixed media, this is how you blend it. So it turns out it's actually pretty common practice. I haven't seen a lot of people do that with like, say, stop speaking or one study or anything like that. So it's just something to consider. Like if next time you're playing a piece with tape, ask yourself, what is the relationship of the acoustic sound with the digital sound? And could it use a little help just blending it with those two things? All right, making sense so far? Any questions, comments, concerns for my well-being? No? Okay. The next very important button is this one that looks like a speaker, DAC on. That basically just makes it, turns on the audio outputs to whatever interface I have, be that my laptop speakers or this lovely beat up PreSonus audio thing I have right now, audio interface, not audio thing. And then the next important bit is the MIDI controller. So as I said before, I'm firing all of the sounds with my foot, and this just enables me to pick which MIDI controller if I have multiple, and then make sure that that it is on channel 64, which I won't go too deep into MIDI today, but 64 is the MIDI value of pedals generally. So that's that max patch, and I'll show you another one a little bit later on and show you how they're very similar. This is notation for it. This is around the section it got really notey. And the way he notates the triggers is you see those these things below the staff that I've colored in. I used the colors to denote if I was playing with my left foot or my right foot early on, because as I said before, it's a lot of coordination and choreography trying to get this happening. But this is how he notates it. And I think this highlights another thing that helps me as a performer using this kind of strategy with fixed media. Because as you can see, trigger number 27 happens on the 32nd note. I don't even know what you would call that in 32nd notes. I'm sure they have some nonsense in the Eastman County system. But the 8th 32nd note of that bar. And if I were playing it with a track and I were trying to time that out, it would be like I'd be stressing trying to get that to land exactly right. But with the way he has it set up, I know exactly when it's going to hit, because I'm just going to hit that note with my foot. So it gives me a lot more security. However, on the flip side, that same trigger, the media that it triggers, has another accent that happens much later, right on that sforzando that's supposed to line up. And so the track it triggers, if you want to think about it like that, is very long, and I have to adhere to the tempo really, really diligently. So I do that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that way. And I haven't asked him why he didn't do that specific sforzando as a thing, but I'll ask him about that later. So that is Daniel's piece. It's something that, I don't know, I think it's a really good way of approaching music with just fixed media in it that has the performer in mind. So any questions on that before I move on? You know? Okay. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. So the other part, pause this for a drink. The other part of my dissertation is going to be doing a lot of commissioning because, as I said, oops, that's why that happened. Okay. Speaker was unplugged. The other part of my dissertation is going to be commissioning works with some audio effects, some live processing that I have developed and that I'm working alongside composers to develop that incorporate the musician in a really natural way to where they don't have to do too much with the MIDI controller. Because nothing's worse than watching someone play and then try to like get something to happen on a MIDI controller. So what I want in my ideal world is processed sound that responds to the performer in a really concrete way. There's a couple ways I've done this. I already have 3 commissions out. One is with this amazing young composer at UT. His name is Sebastian Zhang. You should all look him up. He just recently released a marimba solo. He just wrote for himself called Snapdragon, and he had a piece premiered by Sandbox Percussion at UT recently. You know those guys, they're all right. Called Bubblegum Eyes. You should really check that out. It's amazing work. He's an amazing young composer, only 19 years old. I guess he's a junior now. But so I commissioned him to write for this, and he just immediately went off with it. I was supposed to have, he gave me like a minute's worth of draft music, but I couldn't get the tech together. So Sebastian, if you're watching this in the future, I'm so sorry. But what I do have for you is some a patch in a program called Abelton Live. Is anyone familiar with Abelton? Yeah. Abelton is a great program, not only for recording, but it's designed with the live performer in mind. And so, since I unfortunately don't have Sebastian's music with me, I'm just going to kind of improvise at you for a second, if you'll allow. But first, let me make sure my mic's working. Cool. So these are just a few effects that I've developed over the years, just kind of, you know, sitting alone in a practice room with a couple microphones on a Saturday with nothing to do. And yeah, so just improv a little bit with what I've come up with here. So that kind of idea. Thoughts, concerns, cool, lame, exciting, boring. Like I said, I'm here to get, I guess, like feedback and also also just like curiosity. So is there anything you heard in there that you would like to know more about before I just start spouting? Any specific sound? What was that, sorry? No, so all of that was processed sound coming out from the marimba that I've run through Abelton. So like for example, one of the effects that I am really excited about, that I haven't really gotten many composers on board with, was this filter sweep idea. So every time I have it rigged to where every time I hold the pedal down, it sends it to effects that have what's called an envelope follower on them, which basically means that I can control any dial, I can move any dial with the volume coming out. So the louder it is, it'll turn the dial a certain way, and then as it comes down. And when I say filters, is everyone clear on what that means? So filters will filter out a certain range of frequencies happening, and you hear them a lot in pop music. In fact, you kind of create them naturally if you do like a really good cymbal roll into a choking, right? That sound is very similar to what's called a low pass sweep, where all of the high sounds suddenly just go down in kind of a succinct way, right? So you get that like. So what's happening here, and I wish I had screen share so I could just show you, but I'll do my best to describe. What's happening here is when I press the pedal down, it will turn on an effect that distorts the sound, and distortion naturally kind of pushes up the higher overtones of the sound, so it makes it sound more gritty, I mean, you've all heard guitar distortion, right? It makes it sound like. So that means, and then, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The envelope follower, which as I said controls certain parameters with the volume, is attached to a filter, and every time it gets loud, and so the filter kind of follows the volume. So every time it gets louder, it's pushing that filter up, allowing more higher overtones in. And since the marimba and all percussion instruments are very attack-heavy instruments, that envelope looks a lot like this, right? Starts very sudden and then tapers down. And that's why you get that natural kind of sound. That is the sound of the filter slowly going down to the lower frequencies, right? And then after that, I have it run through a bunch of fun delay stuff that reverses it. That's more just for funsies, but. So you can hear that. That's been a tricky one to avoid feedback. So that's one I would like to play around with more. The composers I'm working with have been super keen on that, but they have been really excited about this one. This is what I'm calling. Forgot not to turn on the delay while I'm talking. I hate the sound of my own voice. This one I'm calling gated delay because what I've done is I have one delay running at what we'll call 8 notes, and then another delay running twice the speed. However, the second delay is put behind a noise gate, and a noise gate does exactly what it sounds like. It won't allow any noise in below a certain dB level, and dB is just kind of the arbitrary measurement we use to measure sound. And so what that means is that if I have it tweaked just right, every time I play an accent, that effect kicks on. Okay, so I'll just show you an example of that. Right? Okay. So that's getting towards my ideal future of like this completely integrated performer electronics relationship, where there's multiple effects happening, but we're triggering them with things other than pedals or knobs or things like that. It's with facilities that we are taught to use as musicians, like accents, maybe even certain notes. There are ways, there are certain programs that have what's called pitch tracking algorithms. So anytime you play a certain note, it'll recognize the note and an event will happen. You can make that whatever you want. So just things like that. And there are pieces like that out there, but they are really, really hard to set up, and you need like really quiet spaces in order to do them. Like in here with the fans on, that would completely negate any sort of like pitch tracking thing that would happen. So it's really hard to do. So what I'm trying to do with these commissions is get composers working with this stuff that are of like mind to me, that, yeah, just share the same vision so that we can work towards integrating and doing really doing the things that a lot of guitar players have been doing for decades, right? So that's my spiel about processing. Any questions so far before I move on to the final section? Good? Comments, concerns? Okay, so for my final thing, I'll address the elephant in the room, which is this is a lot of gear. And this is a lot of stuff to set up. And when you're approaching something like this that requires microphones, you're not going to want to set all this up every time you go to just practice, or even sometimes even to perform. You won't be able to. So I'm going to show you a nifty little way I've worked around this with this vibraphone piece. And at this point, I will put that slide up. This is another really interesting, pretty old, over 10 years old piece that I found through working, where is that stand? There it is. They're working with the composition department at UT, who is very, very electronically minded. It's by a Brazilian composer named Octavi Rumbau. And all I do is just read that at your leisure as I'm playing and setting up. But, so as I said, this is a lot. And you don't necessarily want to bust out the stands and the mics and the absurdly long XLR cables every time you go to practice, right? Like setting up multi-solos is enough. Like we've all been in the practice room and be like, wow, I really need to practice Ray-Bons, but I don't want to lug out the conga and the bass drum and all these things. And this is that. I guess it's not quite as bad as that, but you know, it's comparable. So here's a nifty little thing I've come up with. This is a handheld recorder. It's called a Tascam. It's very similar to a Zoom. You don't need to have this brand, but, oops, actually, need to turn that off. What I like about this one, this is not an ad, is that it has what's called audio interface functionality. And what that means is that you can get sound directly from this into your computer into a DAW. So you can use this bypasses all of this, right? It has the microphones built in, you can just go directly into your computer. I will show you just how fast you can set that up. Making sure I don't bump the cables, cool. Turn this off. And since I'm lazy, I literally just set it on my music stand. And I'm going to show you how effective that is right now with this piece. And for proof of concept, I guess I'll have to move quicker because my whole point is that it's much simpler to do it. Just find the patch. So, as I said, I set this up, turn it on, turn it off makes it do the thing. Turn it on, and it goes into audio interface mode, and then I have a microphone for this very interesting piece. And select it, and we're good to go. And I guess you just have to take my word for it because the processing doesn't start right away. But, so obviously, like this isn't meant to be something you perform with, but just like with anything else, you need a practice pad, right? You need something that's just at your fingertips that you can pull out anytime, because ours is an instrument of gear and lugging things, and you kind of have to come to terms with that in a certain way, but there's also ways around that so that you can do your daily practicing. You will, also, obviously, probably need one of these. This is a MIDI pedal connected to my Akai MIDI controller to do pieces like these. But like I said, the type of stuff I'm working towards is stuff that hopefully wouldn't need. So I'll keep you updated on that as we do that. But MIDI controllers are another thing that's very handy to have. You can, if you have it with a DAW, you can do basically anything with it. I will, like I said, I won't get too much into the nitty-gritty of that because that's not what I'm here to do today. But just another thing that is important to have in your musical wheelhouse, I think. And this thing too, like just for recording yourself, like in a little practice space, so you have something better than just iPhone audio or computer audio, which for some reason this microphone hates the sound of marimba. Every time I try to record marimba in the MacBook speakers, it's just like. So it's a good investment. It's like it's $100, sure, but think of that compared to how much money is in any of your mallet bags or your clarinet bag or anything else. It's an investment in your sound, just like anything else. So something to consider. So now on to the music. This is another piece that is run off of Max MSP. I'm going to start kind of towards the end of it. But this piece has not only fixed media, but also various amounts of processing on it. You'll hear kind of random delays. If you were in here before, you probably heard I was talking and like it was kind of bouncing around everywhere. So that's what that is it's a bunch of different delays happening at different times to create that kind of whirling effect. It also has, it's called a frequency shifter, which just kind of, I unfortunately am not smart enough to describe exactly what happens, but you'll just hear something really funky come out. So I will play the last little bit of this solo, and it's going to start very loud, so just pretend I've been doing something wild and impressive for the past 3 minutes or so to warrant this very loud thing that's about to happen. The other, let me show you the patch before I get started actually. So this is the patch. For some reason, it cut off. Maybe this happened the other day at SWU too. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so you can see it there. So it's very similar to Daniel's patch, which you can kind of see in the thumbnail up there, right? You have your DAC, which turns the audio on. You have your triggers, which is notated very similarly in the score. You have your MIDI, which this one, I don't know if you can see, it's set to 63, not 64, so you need to adjust for that every time you do it. Just a small little thing about MIDI. And then, what was the fourth thing? I can't remember what the fourth thing was. Oh, and then the start, it doesn't have a formal start button like Daniel's has because it has a lot of different processing happening. So that's the max patch for this, and then I'll put the program notes back up. So this is just the last little bit of in rhythm. that's all it was at the very end. Like everything you heard coming out of the speakers, that weird ethereal sound, was just various different delays that were moving the pitch around. So just an example of something like you can create a soundscape just out of the acoustic sounds you have. Right? Super small and super dry. Maybe that's just something you can't get away from. Like, oh yeah. Yeah, that could be a way around that. That would be very expensive and complicated. But yeah, that could be a cool way to do it. But yeah, these are all things to think about when you're thinking about like doing something like this, even with mixed media. So yeah, the environment is something to consider for sure, and that's something I've come up against as I'm trying to develop sounds. Like I have to tune it just so that we don't get any feedback, and I still did a lot, and I was still kind of writing that. And yeah, it changes from space to space, and hopefully you're lucky enough to have like an audio engineer in the space or with you. But if not, yeah, that's another thing you kind of have to figure out. And I think I'm a huge advocate for this because I think all musicians should try to at least dabble in audio because it teaches you a lot about your sound. Anyone who's ever tried to record themselves knows that. And when you really get into fine-tuning it with all of these different tools, there's just a lot you learn about it. And it's a valuable skill to have because that's money you don't have to pay someone else to do for you. And you can really make sure you get the sound you want. Or if you're me, get close to it and give up because I'm a perfectionist. But, so yeah, these are all things to consider. And sometimes you can't get away from the acoustic sound, and that's okay. That's what I've been telling my composers that I'm working with. Like, you're not going to have a completely wet performance. You're going to have a dry sound. So yeah, hopefully the piece accounts for that. And if not, then just kind of do your best, I guess. But yeah, great question. Thank you. Anything else?
Not any questions, but I was going to say it'd be kind of cool for the people left here to come back and watch you do some of the marimba piece, so they can see the processing.
Yeah, you mean the Abelton thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here, what I could do is just kind of